Undercover boss told to wait outside. Minutes later, he fires the entire management team. A damp morning at Atlanta International Airport. Light rain was falling. The pavement shimmered with puddles, reflecting the blue and white flickers of flight information boards in the main hall. Crowds moved steadily toward the check-in counters, dense but silent. Only the sound of suitcase wheels on tile and clipped airport dialogue could be heard. ID, please. Gate 14. Final boarding call. Among the crowd, a middle-aged man walked calmly toward the first-class entrance. A white dress shirt slightly wrinkled at the sleeves. A dark brown leather backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. Reading glasses clipped to his shirt pocket. No Rolex. No UMI luggage. No rush like a businessman. He looked more like a college professor on his way to visit an old friend, nothing more. But in fact, he was Jackson Blake, 47 years old, founder and CEO of Skybridge Airlines, the same man once featured on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "From One Leased Plane to 28 Employees." Today, no one recognized him. And that was exactly the point of this trip. Jackson tapped lightly on the glass door of the first-class lounge, a quiet space behind frosted glass beige leather chairs, soft yellow lights, and the gentle sound of a high-end espresso machine. The receptionist, a young man in a light blue shirt with gel-slicked hair, barely looked up. He glanced at Jackson's shirt and said quickly, "Sorry, sir. This lounge is for first-class passengers only. Please wait in the public seating area. No check of membership. No name verification. No questions asked." Jackson said nothing. He quietly pulled a small black leather notebook from his inside pocket and stepped back. He didn't argue, didn't introduce himself, just nodded patiently and moved to the bench just outside the glass wall. Less than 2 minutes later, another man walked up, charcoal designer suit, hair freshly cut, dragging a slim rim-away suitcase. No ID check. The receptionist stood up smiling. "Welcome back, Mr. Cole. Your usual scotch is waiting." The door opened immediately. A faint scent of oak and leather slipped through before it closed again, clearly separating two different worlds. Jackson still said nothing. He simply opened his notebook and jotted down a line: access denied to lounge. No smile. No verification. No effort. Outfit judged. Assumed economy. He had seen this happen many times. Observed it. Analyzed it. But this was the first time he was the one denied inside a system he had built. Jackson had begun this trip almost 2 weeks ago. In his office on the 40th floor of the Manhattan headquarters, amidst reports of ranking drops and customer complaints about strange treatment, he had sensed something was wrong. Not missing luggage, not delayed flights, but the way people were being categorized. Not by the name on their boarding pass, but by the clothes they wore, the bag they carried, and the way they didn't look the part. And now, after being turned away from a lounge he himself designed, every suspicion became crystal clear, as if someone had wiped away the fog from the glass. Minnie Twist, a man sitting 3 seats away from Jackson, older, holding an old magazine, tilted his head and said quietly without looking up, "They did that to me last month." "Right here." Jackson looked up surprised. "They denied you access to the lounge?" The man nodded, still reading. "Unless I wear a suit, there's always a reason to hold me back." That sentence, so calm yet so heavy, sank deep into Jackson's thoughts. It wasn't just a feeling, not a guess, but a shared pattern. He wrote again in his notebook, repeat pattern. Multiple targets. Not accident. The speaker overhead announced a flight to Chicago. Jackson stood, backpack weighing on his shoulder, but his eyes glanced again toward the lounge where the receptionist was now smiling at another guest, just walking in cashmere coat, glossy leather briefcase, polished Oxford shoes. Jackson took a deep breath. He wasn't angry, not even disappointed, but something had just sunk in very deeply. The service culture he once believed in was operating on a silent, unspoken, very real form of bias. Not written in the training manual, not outlined in the service procedures, but embedded in every glance, every nod, every mouse click. It existed precisely because no one noticed it until he became the one experiencing it himself. And now, with every step through the hallway to the gate, Jackson understood something clearly. He didn't just need to take notes anymore. He needed to act. Jackson Blake sat quietly on the cold leather bench by the window, just one pane of frosted glass away from the first-class lounge. Inside, a staff member in a vest was pouring drinks for guests. And here he was, the founder of the very airline featured in every strategic document about premium experiences, now denied entries simply for looking too ordinary. No one knew the middle-aged man sitting with his head slightly bowed, fiddling with a black pen in his hand, was the person who laid the foundation for the entire system. And no one saw his eyes, still not out of anger, but from the weight of a deep and irreversible realization. Jackson opened his notebook, the familiar, deliberate motion, as if his hands had chronicled life itself in strokes of ink. He wrote access denied to lounge. No smile. No verification. No effort. Outfit judged. Assumed economy. He paused, pen hovering in midair, then added pattern confirmed. Subtle. Repeated. Systemic. Next to him, a young boy was trying to plug in headphones for his mother. The mother, in a thin coat, glanced up at the digital display. Their flight was delayed by 15 minutes. No one came to assist. No priority boarding announcement. And beyond the glass, a group of passengers who had just arrived carrying designer bags, wearing pressed suits, were being ushered straight to the bar. There was a clear boundary, no painted lines, but everyone could feel it. And in that moment, Jackson knew this was no longer just a survey. This was a real problem. And it had touched him directly for the first time without a buffer. He closed his notebook, but instead of standing up to leave, he leaned back, watching the check-in area with the sharp eyes of a man who had read through thousands of reports yet never seen the truth behind the numbers. A small chime sounded on the lounge receptionist's phone. She glanced at the screen, bowed her head slightly, and quickly typed out a short message flag. Outfit mismatch. Needs re-verify. Jackson didn't know the exact content, but what was strange, she hadn't looked at any ID, didn't open any files. She simply glanced at a middle-aged man nearby wearing a plain cotton shirt, holding his boarding pass, and quietly typed. 20 seconds later, security arrived to recheck his documents. No noise, no explanation, but the action itself felt like a routine operation, well-trained, as if this was not an exception, but standard procedure. Jackson turned away, but his mind was racing faster than any executive meeting he had ever attended. What he had once suspected now revealed itself layer by layer. Not a series of isolated incidents, not just a few impolite employees, but a hidden system, a mechanism for classifying passengers based on appearance. And worse, it didn't live in documentation, wasn't embedded in software. It lived in how staff looked at people, how they exhaled when seeing a tailored suit, how they avoided eye contact with someone in faded jeans. Jackson remembered day 3 of this trip at Boston Airport. An elderly woman, gray hair, scratched suitcase, presented her Skybridge diamond card, but was asked for extra paperwork. Right after that, a man with a silver suitcase walked past, no check, greeted with "Right this way, sir." He had taken notes he had suspected, but today he himself was misjudged because of an old leather backpack. He flipped back through his earlier pages. Denver Gate 11 upgrade denied to family of 4 in matching hoodies. Minutes later, solo traveler in blazer bumped to first.
Chicago agent skipped ID verification for guest with TUMI bag.
Ask full recheck for guy with tote backpack. Atlanta elderly woman lifting bag alone. No help. Agent assists, suited man 3 rows down immediately. All followed a pattern. No shouting. No confrontation. Just quiet denials, no smiles, no greetings, no verifications. A system silent, but razor sharp. And most importantly, it existed because no one thought they had the right to speak up. Jackson closed his eyes for a few seconds, regained his breath, then pulled out his phone and sent a brief message to Elaine Barrett, COO of Skybridge Update Lounge access denied. Appearance-based filtering confirmed. Need deeper pattern trace. Keep discreet. Nothing more was needed. Elaine would understand. They had built Skybridge together from a small office in Cincinnati. And now he needed her to help unravel what the system had silently grown into. A new group of passengers approached the lounge desk. The hostess quickly slid the door open, smiling with perfect tone. Jackson watched her eyes as they scanned each guest with practiced ease. But this time, he noticed something small. She paused for half a second when she saw someone dressed simply, then glanced at her phone as if waiting for instructions. That single pause was enough for him to log in his mind, this isn't reflex anymore. This is programming. And that was the point of no return. This system had seeped into layers of behavior so deeply, people no longer realized they were doing something wrong. Jackson stood up. Not rushed. Not angry. But he had made a decision. If necessary, he would be the one to peel this system apart layer by layer from the inside. For the next 10 days, Jackson Blake, under the name Jim Harper, quietly passed through airports large and small from Denver to Miami, from Boston to Phoenix. On each flight, he sat in the last rows. No perks. No priority. Just an ordinary man with a matty black notebook, every page filled with precise, compact handwriting. The first story happened at Gate 26 Charlotte Airport. An elderly woman around 70 walked slowly, dragging a worn brown suitcase. She stood quietly next to the boarding counter. Her app clearly displayed Diamond, the airline's highest tier member. But the desk agent barely looked up. No greeting. No app scan. No offer to help. Could you wait until Group 4? Please, the voice was cold, as if she were a burden, not a 15-year loyal customer. A minute later, a young man in a gray suit wheeled a Louis Vuitton bag to the counter. Welcome back, sir. Let me walk you through. The same face now wore a bright smile. Jackson said nothing. He lowered his eyes, opened his notebook, and slowly wrote elderly woman ignored. Diamond. No thanks. No assistance. Young man behind her suit designer wallet escorted to gate. Emotional drop. The image of that small woman dragging her suitcase across the moving carpet, disappearing behind the boarding doors. No one turned to look back. Day 12. Phoenix. A young couple, white t-shirts, jeans, holding confirmed upgrade tickets. They arrived early. Their upgrade had already been approved in the app. The agent asked, "Do you have any verification paperwork or a direct upgrade code from headquarters?" They looked confused. A quiet, internal call was made. Then they were asked to step aside. "I thought it was confirmed," the girl whispered. The boy silently closed his wallet. Meanwhile, a middle-aged man in a Ralph Lauren shirt and a Rolex stepped up. No questions asked. The agent nodded, upgraded to 1A. "Enjoy your flight, sir." Jackson stood behind and saw the reflection of the young man's downcast eyes in the glass panel nearby. Emotional drop. No shouting. No confrontation. Just hope quietly pulled away, as soft as a shrug. Day 14. Flight from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Jackson chose a seat near the back by the window. Late afternoon light poured through, casting a golden streak across the seat. A woman walked in familiar posture. He recognized her immediately, Diane Walker, a flight attendant from a previous flight. Today, she wasn't working. Wearing casual clothes, she sat down beside him.
She didn't notice him, pulled out her phone, scrolled quickly.
But Jackson tilted his head slightly, just enough to see a name pop up on the screen. Thomas Reed. A message popped up on the screen. Some guy caused a scene at a TL lounge. Looked like a confused professor or something.
Sarah made him wait outside.
We flagged it. The reply came instantly. Watch for similar behavior at LAX. Same protocol. Already handled. Re-verify ID at check-in. Random security if needed. Jackson didn't move. In the fading cabin light, he saw the keywords clearly. Flagged. Same protocol. Already handled. This wasn't random. This wasn't subjective perception. It was a system. A strategy designed by people. Emotional drop. Jackson turned to the window, not to hide confusion, but to conceal the anger building deep in his chest. He whispered in his mind, "We didn't accidentally become unjust. We designed it to be this way." That night, he didn't sleep, sitting alone at a small desk in his hotel room in L. Jackson flipped through every page of his notebook, each line now solid proof of what everyone else called just a feeling. But now he had words. He had names. He had behavior patterns and timestamps. A secret system had been built. Not on paper, not written into any manual, but passed down through private messages, a nod, and a brief smile to the right kind of guest. The next morning, in an encrypted email to headquarters, Jackson wrote only 3 lines. "This isn't bias. It's a program. I've seen enough."
Start preparing the boardroom.
3 days later. Conference room 42 and floor headquarters of Skybridge Airlines, Chicago. It had never been this quiet. Jackson walked in no longer the man in the wrinkled shirt and old backpack. Today, he was himself. The founder. The acting CEO. The man who had built this airline empire from 2 aging planes 15 years ago. 8 regional directors, 3 senior managers, and Thomas Reed, head of direct customer services, were already seated. On the projector screen, a single slide. Customer experience, audit phase 2. Jackson didn't look at anyone. He placed his old brown leather notebook on the table. Edges frayed. Pages folded. Well worn. Then he began the presentation. No flashy PowerPoint. No pie charts. Just raw video footage, unedited. An elderly passenger waiting silently at check-in for 9 minutes with no assistance. A young couple confused over a canceled ticket with no clear explanation from staff. A man with darker skin dressed simply denied an upgrade despite holding priority access. And finally, the closing clip. Jackson Blake himself being denied access to the first-class lounge at San Diego Airport. "Sir, we need to see proof of your ticket." "Sir, you don't look like a premium guest."
Sir, please wait over there.
No one in the boardroom took a breath. Everyone knew this was the moment. There would be no walking this back. Jackson looked up, his voice calm but heavy. 4 airports. 3 ID checks. All because I wore a $39 jacket. He paused. The silence sliced through the room like ice. "Explain this to me, Thomas. Is this the customer experience you're so proud of?" Thomas Reed opened his mouth, tried to speak, but all he managed was to raise his hand, then quietly lower it again. Jackson pulled out a document, an internal email from Thomas dated 3 months prior. Customers not aligned with Skybridge brand image flagged them. Double-check tickets. Delay upgrades if needed. A campaign of classification by glance. A system that punished simplicity. An unofficial policy never written in any handbook, but silently enforced by regional managers. You built a system that humiliated the CEO of the airline at his own airport. You made me feel like I didn't deserve to fly on my own plane. Jackson turned to the head of HR. Thomas Reed, terminate immediately. No notice. No severance. He turned to the regional directors. 17 staff members directly involved suspend all pending investigation. No one objected. No one defended. Because this time, the truth was too clear. Undeniable. Not up for debate. A woman in the room, head of East Coast Customer Care, lowered her head. A tear dropped onto her chin. She whispered, "We should have spoken up sooner." Jackson tightened his fist, then let go. Not out of anger, but regret. Because this company was supposed to be a place where everyone was treated with respect, not measured by the brand on their clothes. Then he nodded gently. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to every passenger you made feel like they weren't good enough just because they didn't carry a designer bag." No applause. None was needed. Because that moment was not for celebration. It was for everyone in that room to understand a good system doesn't start with the capital letters in a handbook. It begins with the courage to fix what was never written but slowly eroded trust every single day. 3 days after the mass suspension, the entire Skybridge airline system was placed under emergency internal audit. On Monday morning at exactly 10:00 a.m. Eastern Time, thousands of employees opened their inboxes to see one headline mandatory broadcast CEO address. Jackson Blake appeared on screen, standing inside the old terminal where Skybridge's first plane had taken flight. He wore a white shirt, no tie. Behind him, worn metal chairs and a crooked Skybridge sign. No fancy backdrop. No stage lighting. Only the silence of truth. He didn't begin with a greeting, but with accountability. I'm Jackson Blake, and I take full responsibility for every smile twisted by this system. A long pause. Then he looked into the camera as if meeting each person eye to eye. I wasn't denied service because I was a customer. I was denied because I was simply myself. He shared the story of the first time he ever flew at age 19. Carrying a plastic bag filled with books lost in the middle of LAX. No one helped. No one asked. He slept under the chairs, head resting on a suitcase, pretending to read just to mask the look of confusion on his face. That day, I promised myself if I ever built an airline, no one would ever have to feel like that again. He paused. Eyes reddened. Not from anger, but because what he built had betrayed the promise he made to his younger self. The greatest failure is not that mistakes happen, it's letting them happen in silence. Then he announced the changes. Starting today, Skybridge Airlines would eliminate all visual-based guest profiling procedures. Every frontline employee would be retrained, not on brand identity, but on human dignity. A customer advisory board was established. It includes people with disabilities, elderly passengers, and travelers from various backgrounds. They have the authority to conduct anonymous evaluations and report directly to the CEO. Most importantly, every Q3 senior executives, including Jackson himself, will go undercover to work regular shifts, check-in baggage handling, beverage service. Not just to monitor, but to understand. I don't want to know how this company looks on reports. I want to know whether a passenger feels respected the moment they walk through the door. The words needed no music, but many viewers sat in silence for a long time afterward. A flight attendant in Dallas, who had once requested a transfer out of frustration, sent a message for the first time. I heard our CEO speak like a person, not a brand. An Asian American employee in Los Angeles wrote on the internal channel, a customer once told me, you probably don't speak English well, and no one stood up for me. Today, I believe the company won't let that happen again. Jackson ended his speech with an image standing before the airline's first aircraft, now stripped of its engines, turned into a storage space. I used to think the first plane was the symbol of the beginning, but really, a beginning is the moment you dare to admit that you've lost your way. And he stepped out of frame without turning back. But he left behind a feeling that had never existed in the system before. The feeling that change was real. And this time it came from the very top. 6 weeks after the national broadcast, Skybridge officially launched the Flight Without Judgment program, a system-wide initiative praised by international media. But for Jackson, real change didn't come from press releases. It came from a quiet morning meeting at a near-empty lounge in Portland Airport. The silver-haired man wearing a brown wool coat and worn leather shoes sitting near the window flipping through an old travel magazine was David Mitchell. The same elderly passenger who had once been ignored at the check-in desk just because he didn't have fancy luggage. Jackson approached, no entourage, no cameras. Just hands in his pockets, a sincere look and a quiet invitation. I've got an empty seat on the next flight to Seattle, and another in Skybridge's customer oversight board. David looked up, blinked a few times. He didn't say a word. Just nodded and reached out, gripping Jackson's hand. No, thank you. No theatrics. Just a real handshake. At the board's first meeting, David sat between a deaf traveler and a college student once denied boarding because of a torn backpack. They had no titles, no flashy RSMS, but they represented what Skybridge had once forgotten, the voices of those left behind. The pilot program voice from the gate was launched. Each week, one randomly selected passenger would serve as a travel advisor, giving direct feedback to the crew after their flight. Not through surveys, but through face-to-face conversation. At the same time, all Skybridge airports and aircraft were updated with a new pledge replacing the old marketing slogan, "Every traveler. Every time. Equal welcome." No distinctions based on ticket class, skin color, shoes, bags, or flight frequency. In the 18th floor office of Skybridge HQ, the leather notebook Jackson always carried was now closed, mounted in a frame next to the window. The last page bore a firm handwritten line written right after his meeting with David: "Respect isn't a feature. It's the flight. Respect isn't an add-on service. It is the reason every flight takes off or remains in someone's heart." Jackson stood still, looking at that sentence for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out into the hallway. No need for final words, because now he knew no one else needed to speak to finally be seen.
Skybridge had learned how to listen again.
And sometimes that alone is what makes an airline truly soar.